Abbaim to a Telfed function in Jerusalem, co-sponsored by Wits Alumni and hosted by Mizrahi Olami. It's a pleasure to see such a wonderful crowd over here. Thank you all for joining us. I want to take the opportunity in thanking the Jerusalem Telfed Committee and everybody involved to make this event a success that it is, and also thank the Jerusalem Telfed Committee as volunteers in welcoming Olim to Jerusalem in the name of the organization. Also to my dear friend and partner in this, Michelle, the head of volunteers and worker of Telfed, who's done a fantastic job, and it's a great pleasure to work with you. And to Mimi, our distinguished guest, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you. I guess part of you were stuck in traffic and getting here and congestion outside the building. That's not because of demonstrations. That's for good reasons. For a happy, great celebration that's taking just place in the Jewish Agency area next door in the promenade, where honored guests are President Herzog, Doron Almog, the head of the Jewish Agency, and the head of the WZO, Yaakov Chagoel. It's a kickstart of a national event to start off celebrations for Israel's 75th anniversary. And we're right next door celebrating with them, as Telfed also is celebrating 75 years. The last week we've all been aware of Yom Hashoah, listening to shows, videos, talks, going to different events, going to Salon, and it's certainly been a difficult week for us all. I guess 80 years ago, no one who was unfortunate in situations like that, in camps, hard labor, day after day, starvation, beatings, and more, none of those people of our nation could have ever have dreamed that there'll be a continuation of our nation. Never mind a state of Israel, flourishing as it is with almost 10 million citizens, and we are part of those citizens. We're part of the tapestry of Israel. And we made the decision, all of us, most of us sitting here, made the decision as Olim to make this our new home. As Israel is a powerful state, recognized worldwide as a global leader in many ways, and we shouldn't, and nobody else living here should take it for granted ever. This is a miracle that we're living through, and day by day we should recognize it. So I welcome you all again. I'm sure we'll be greatly inspired by Mimi's amazing talk. And now I call upon my friend and colleague Doron Klein, who's the CEO of Telfed, to say a warm word of welcome.
Roy, honor and a pleasure to be here this evening, especially to be here with you, Mimi. Thank you for coming to grace us with your presence and to share your words with us. So, as Roy said, we're celebrating our 75th birthday together with the State of Israel, and that's the reason why I'm actually having two events. I'm at this event with you now, but I also have to be at that event because it's also part of Telfed's birthday celebrations. We were founded with the State of Israel in 1948 to look after the 800 Machal soldiers who came to volunteer in the War of Independence from South Africa, and for more than the last decade we've also been involved with the absorption of Australians. Aussie? Okay, there you go. So we have quite a few of you here. So it's fantastic to be here. It's also fantastic also to be there and celebrating with the Jewish Agency the birthdays of the State of Israel and of Telfed. So just a little bit about the organization, and this is part of our celebration of life that we here together with Mimi and also just down the road with the Jewish Agency. What you see before you are the different departments in Telfed. The Klita department, the pre-Aliyah, the Klita department being really the mainstay of Telfed since 1948. Involved with the Olim before they come, helping to plan their Klita after they arrive. You can see last year we had 471 Olim from South Africa, 198 from Australia. And the more that we're in touch with people before they come, the more we can help plan their Klita and give a smoother Klita. So for all of you guys, you still have your families and friends in South Africa and Australia. Encourage all of those that are thinking about making Aliyah to be in touch with us as soon as possible so we can help them to plan their Klita. The more we can plan the Klita, the smoother it will be. A special, no, it's actually probably there. If there's like no activity, then it switches off. So For those who are here who are thinking of still going into the army, or if you have family or friends that are lone soldiers, please tell them that we have a special division for lone soldiers, pre-induction while they're in the army, events, helping them out, and specifically when they leave the army. Actually, one of the greatest challenges for our lone soldiers is not while they're in the army. You would think that's what it is. Actually, the greatest challenge is when they leave the army and they have to deal with Israeli civilian life and have to sign a rental contract with an Israeli landlord, right? Those are the big challenges. So we're there to help them during their induction while in the army, but the big help we give is when they finish the army. So please encourage those people that are thinking of coming to serve that they should be in touch with us as soon as possible. Employment, this applies to everybody here who happens to be looking for a job. Also tell family and friends that are thinking of coming here. Free employment counseling, helping people get ready for the job market through many seminars that we give, and especially our mentors. We have 145 South African and Australian mentors, and I'm turning to you because maybe some of you guys want to become mentors. These are people that are successful in their fields here in Israel and are prepared to volunteer to help us absorb the new Olim in that field. Right? So if we have a bookkeeper who made Aliyah from South Africa or Australia 5 years ago, and now they're working in their field, that bookkeeper will be a mentor, and we'll match that bookkeeper with a bookkeeper that's coming from Australia or South Africa to give that bookkeeper advice how it is that they manage in their field. So first of all, it's good news for the people who are thinking of planning Aliyah, but I'm turning to you guys. If any of you want to be mentors, so please be in touch with us. Yael is our employment advisor. So that's the Klita pillar. The next pillar is social welfare. All of you here, every one of you here are eligible for the Telfed scholarships. No matter what your age is, you can go and study at university, right, at any age. And no matter how old you are, or how young you are, you can finish high school, you can go and study and get the Telfed scholarships. So we provide 200 plus volunteering scholarships. The students do 2 hours of community service every week, helping us absorb the Olim. They go into the Ole family unit. They become a big brother, big sister. They're there helping the parents, the elderly, people with special needs. So if you want to be a student, come join the PRUS program. You'll get 6,000 shekels a year, and you'll volunteer 2 hours a week helping us absorb new Olim. But also tell your family and friends, or maybe it's you guys as well, if you want a student for 2 hours a week to help you with your absorption, so apply for a PRUS student. We have 200 of them all over the country. We also give 300 scholarships based on financial need scholarships. That's 500 all in all. And SASI, that's specifically for the South Africans studying in Israel. For those South Africans here, if you have family or friends back in South Africa that aren't sure whether to make Aliyah or not, but want to come study here, we will give them the PRUS scholarship, the 6,000 shekels per year. We'll give it to them even if they don't make Aliyah. You don't have to make Aliyah, just come and study here, because we believe if someone studies for 3 years in an Israeli university, most likely they'll make Aliyah at the end. So we're prepared to put our money where our mouth is. Social welfare. Hopefully no one needs this, but it's there. Full-time social worker, helping people before and after Aliyah if they have problems, if they have a crisis. And we support 450 needy South Africans every month. 450 people every single month, putting food on the table. That costs us 2.5 million shekels a year. The scholarships are another 2.5 million shekels a year. We're the only Olim organization that provides housing out of the 23 Olim organizations. 105 apartments. You guys can also apply if you want to live in Ranana or Tel Aviv. Those apartments are subsidized, about 25% below market rates. And tell your family and friends they can apply, South Africans and Australians. But at the moment, there's a waiting list of 65 families. So the sooner you apply, the better, right? Now, you want to know where does the money come from? For example, for the social welfare, it comes from the rentals. So by renting out 105 apartments, 70% of that rental income goes to help the needy. So though it's tough to put your hand in your pocket and pay rent, but if you know that 70% is going to help needy Olim, it's a bit easier to pay your rent. And the other 30% just stays to look after the buildings. So 100% of that money is either to look after the buildings or to help the needy. We are a non-profit organization. And the last is the community. So 140 volunteers. Our head of volunteerism is Michelle. There she is at the back. Michelle, toda rabba lach. I want to thank, this is the time to thank Michelle, to thank Roy, to thank Terry, to thank Lynn, thank Les, Obviously, Mimi. Anyone else?
Bob is not yet, but Barbara as
We'll say
well.
we love Bobs. Okay. Anyone else?
Did I forget somebody?
Well, if you did, I did. So,
Ilana.
Ilan. Oh.
and Ilana in the community. Thank you. And Ilana too. So, Michelle's in charge of volunteerism. If any of you guys would like to volunteer, to become regional volunteers, help Roy in Jerusalem absorb the Olim, give them advice. No matter where you are in the country, we need volunteers. So if you'd like to volunteer for Telfed, please speak to Michelle at the end of the evening. Our events, an event like this, we have about 50 events a year. That's one a week. Right? This week we had a lot more with Yom Hashoah. But events, in-person, Zoom events. So that's again people in Australia, although the time doesn't always work out, but also South Africa, they can join our events virtually. So it's worthwhile that they sign up with Michelle, sign up, get the newsletter so they can start already joining the Telfed events even while they're still in Australia and South Africa. Tell your friends and family. And go to the Telfed website, newsletter. You should get the newsletter once a month telling you about our events, telling you about updates. Facebook, if you're on Facebook, please like the Telfed Facebook page if you haven't done so. Right? Become part of the community. There's 5,000 people on the Facebook page. Tell your friends and family still in the diaspora. This is the time. Like the Facebook page, there's a huge amount of knowledge from 5,000 people on that page that they can share with. And Instagram probably for the youngsters.
Magazines that you bought.
Thank you. As Roy mentioned, we brought some of the Telfed magazines. You're welcome to help yourself to Telfed magazine on your way out. So that's the organization. This is part of the 75 years that we're celebrating. This has taken 75 years to put together. We have another wonderful future up ahead. This is just going to get more and more because of people like you being part of it, helping us. So I want to thank each one of you for joining us and being here tonight. You know that we're the only nation in the world that has its own term for racism against us, which is anti-Semitism. There is no other nation in the world that has an official name for racism against it. I mean, there's racism all over the world, but against a certain nation, we're the only one that has that term, anti-Semitism. No other nation in the world has a specific term for racism against that nation. Just us. And Rabbi Sinai Adler, he was a survivor of Auschwitz. He was born in Prague. He was the chief rabbi of Ashdod. And then he set up the Yeshivat Hesder in Mevaseret Zion. So Rabbi Sinai Adler said that he saw many shocking things during the Holocaust. He said, but something that shocked him so much was when the Holocaust had ended, because he and his friend were making their way back home to Prague. And on the way, it was starting to become nightfall, and they saw there was a farmhouse. They said, well, listen, instead of sleeping out here on the road, let's go ask the farmer if we can sleep in his barn. So they came to the farmhouse. They said, listen, we Holocaust survivors. We've survived Auschwitz. We're on our way back to our home in Prague. We ask if you can please sleep with the animals in the barn. He said, you're Jews? I said, yes, of course we're Jews. He said, you're to blame for the war. Why would I let you sleep in my barn? This is immediately after the Holocaust. Already the Jews were being blamed for the Holocaust. We're being blamed for World War. We were being blamed immediately afterwards. So part of tonight is honoring you, and part of tonight is for us to learn from Mimi, to learn the truth, to know what the answers are. We have to also be strong in our belief, and it's people like Mimi that help us. Thank you. Erev Tov.
Thanks, Doron. I'd like to call upon my colleague and friend, Les, to say a few words.
Roy, thanks a lot. And Doron, we go back many years. So yesterday I saw something absolutely quite unbelievable. It was the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And who would have thought 80 years ago, those that were there in the uprising would believe that 80 years later, the Israeli president, together with the German president and the Polish president, would be commemorating that event, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. It's just unbelievable. So we're living in amazing, incredible times, and this week has been very, very emotional to all of us. living in Israel with Yom Hashoah. Tonight's event, how did it come about? So before the corona, we were at a Telfed meeting in Roy's home, and we met Ilana, and Ilana mentioned that her mother is a survivor. And I'm very passionate about meeting and just documenting survivors. So I was so excited that Ilana mentioned that her mom will be coming to Israel, that I could just document and interview her. Corona came and we had to delay it. And tonight is actually the realization of that dream, that she'd be coming to Israel and we'd be able to hear her. So I was very fortunate that during Chol Hamoed, I actually went to Ilana's home and I met Mimi, and what a meeting that was. Mimi's story is harrowing, but it is riveting. It is a triumph of survival against all odds. And I was very, very fortunate. We spent 3 hours. Told Mimi I could have spent double the time, but it was coming on for 1 o'clock and everyone was getting tired. But you can watch that interview. It's on YouTube. I think there's over 600 viewers, and people are watching the whole 3 hours nearly. It's actually quite unbelievable, because it is, here you have somebody who was really there. So it is the greatest honor and privilege, and we are so honored really to have you. It's a blessing to have you, and it's like a dream that you're here tonight to share your experiences with us. The work that you do in Sydney and New South Wales is just, it's holy work that you're doing, and it's so important. So I'm really grateful to Roy, to Telfed Wits. I do the Wits in Israel, the alumni. I just want to mention we have the president who's very nearby here. His grandmother actually went to Wits and she graduated at Wits, which is quite unbelievable. And Wits are very, very, very proud to have their branch, their alumni here in Israel. Even with all the BDS and all the anti-Israel sentiment, especially in South Africa, they're very proud to say that they have an alumni which is very active. In fact, we're one of the most active branches of the Wits alumni worldwide, and they're very supportive of us. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Ilana, and I want to thank you so much, Ilana, because that discussion that we had tonight has become a reality. So thank you. And thank you all for coming.
That was 3 years ago. Yeah, a long time ago. So, yeah, I'm Ilana, and I'm Mimi's daughter, and I'm very honoured as not just a Telfed volunteer, but as the daughter of Mimi, to introduce my mum, and I'm very proud to introduce my mum. She's one incredible lady, as those of you who know her, and if you don't know her, you will see tonight. And she's also my role model. She's visiting from Sydney. She's only here 3 weeks, and she's lived in Sydney since she made, or not earlier, since she moved there after the Holocaust in 1947. Mum has a very strong sense of responsibility, believing it's her duty to share her experiences of that terrible time during the war, and she spends, as Les briefly touched on, she spends a lot of all her life basically since the 1990s talking about her experiences. She works at the Sydney Jewish Museum, where she volunteers once a week talking to school children and adults, but mostly school children, and telling her story. And she also, since the 1996, has been working at an organisation called Courage to Care, which sets up exhibitions, pop-up exhibitions, I suppose, in country towns, and that's all over Australia. But Mum works in New South Wales and Queensland, 2 states in Australia, and she goes there for a week at a time to these country towns, and she just does back-to-back for a week, speaking to school groups and adult groups, and they're all non-Jews, and that's what Courage to Care, their thing is to use Holocaust survivor stories as a way of combating intolerance, teaching people to be upstanders instead of bystanders. So that's really important to Mum. So since Mum's been here this last week, well, she's over Pesach she had a bit of a break, except for the cooking, but a little bit of cooking. But since she's been here, she's in this last week. This is her 5th speaking engagement this week, and this is her last one. She's able to go home next week, back to Australia, and she will actually be going to Queensland 3 days after she gets back to Australia. She's going to Queensland to speak another week up there, and I'm just incredibly proud of what you do, and you're an inspiration, Mum. She's a bit of a, those of you know who the Duracell bunny ads, Mum's a Duracell bunny. So Mum was born in Italy in 1937. I'm not going to say any more about that because she's going to tell her story for herself, but this is Mum.
I don't like standing behind lecterns. I'd rather speak, but if you don't hear me, feel free to tell me to speak up. I'm Mimi Wise. I was actually born Miryam Goldman in 1937 in Milan, Italy. My mother and my father were both born in Poland. My mother was born in Warsaw in 1914 to a family called Pshenitsas. I just found out not so long ago that my mother's family, the Pshenitsas, had presence in Poland, in Warsaw, for 7 generations. Business, I'm amazed, I really am. But so, long time presence. My father, and I can't help it, is a Galiciana. He came from Russia, lived in Rzeszów. He was born in 1910. How did my parents meet? My father was actually a yeshiva bucha in Galicia. He was an adherent of the Bluja Baruf, if anyone's ever heard of him. And he lived in America. I actually had the good fortune to meet him in 1958. But, and his father died in 1930 or thereabouts. And he left Poland with an older brother and went to Germany, where he lived a number of years, and I think it's about 1935-36, when he was a religious Zionist, and he was on his way to Palestine. But he and his brother so loved Italy, they sojourned, as we've just had Pesach. So I like to use that term now that I'm in Israel, and I'm not talking to a non-Jewish audience. So he sojourned, he remained in Italy for a while. But he had met my mother on the way from Germany. He went to a city called Strasbourg in France, in Alsace-Lorraine, and there he joined a youth group, Jabotinsky followers. And he met my mother there. She was apparently the president, so she tells me, or she told me because she's no longer alive. But they met there, and although he was a very popular young man, I believe, I have no reason not to believe it, and they got on very well. He went on to Italy, as I said, and he started wooing her with postcards, which I still have, from Italy, writing in many different languages, trying to get her to come and join him and marry him, which she eventually did. I think her parents were the chaperones. And they married in Italy, and in early 1937, and at the end of 1937, December, I was born. So to them, and I remained there. My mother remained with me in Italy till September 1938. So in 1938, Mussolini was in power. There was events going on, but I don't know if that's what prompted my mother to return to Strasbourg. She was an only child, and there was talk of war, and the French and the Germans hated each other anyway, and there was always friction between those two nations. And Alsace-Lorraine, before the First World War, I'm just going to give you a history lesson very rapidly, had belonged to Germany. So it's a very, very Germanic city. The whole Strasbourg was, but the whole of Alsace-Lorraine was. They spoke an Alsacisch Deutsch, which is a German dialect. And my mother returned. She was an only child, so she returned to her parents. She was worried about them. They were very aged. They were in their 50s. You're laughing so much. Okay, and I've always found that very amusing. So she returned to Strasbourg and to be with them. She actually always said that she returned on the night that the Prime Minister, no, it wasn't the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, Eden of England came back with his white paper, Peace in Our Time. The city was blacked out of city of Strasbourg, and she had to trudge to my grandparents' home, and actually the station master helped her. There was no one else to help her. That's the story that I was told. My mother then found she was pregnant shortly after, and she was pregnant with my brother, was soon to be, by March 1939, my brother Sammy was born on Purim. But my father was not able to come to France until 2 weeks before his birth. Why? He was a foreign Jew. And they were not allowing him. And my mother actually sat in, she tried her best to get him in, and she finally managed. And I won't tell you, I won't waste telling you, but she was an extraordinary young woman. And my brother Sammy was born. On about the 31st of August 1939, the authorities of the region of Alsace-Lorraine said that all families, Jewish and not Jewish, who had young children and old people in their families should leave the region, and we were told where to go. Why? Because they would be a hindrance to the war effort and put themselves in danger should the war start. So my father had a car, and they tell of the fact that they took all the seats out and they put tunas in, and we sat in there, and my mother had a pram, and all the masses that they tell you, and we moved south into central France to a place called Périgueux, which was the Dordogne area. And I met someone in Australia in a place called Albury, which is, the Australians among you would know Albury. It's between Victoria and New South Wales on the border. And he read, excuse me, I need to, this man who was born in 1940 was telling me that his birth, he's Jewish, his birth was registered in Périgueux, so his mother had him on the way. She was there, and he had come from Strasbourg. His family had come from Strasbourg. So that was proof to me that there was no exaggeration. This had actually happened. We arrived in Strasbourg. My parents registered Goldmans and Schenitzers together with my grandparents. And they found rooms, and life was normal, except that you had to find work, and there were a lot of refugees, and I started school, and then eventually my brother joined me. So I think that we were there for about 18 months or a little more. My father volunteered for the French army. There were foreign Jews who volunteered for the army to fight for the French, and he was busy training when France capitulated. And his adjutant, his military superior, said to him, Chaim, he couldn't say Chaim, so it was Chaim, leave, go home, go to your family, and my father joined us. We remained there for a while. I know that my grandfather was accused because he had with my grandmother started a little business, and he was selling things, and my grandfather was accused of being a black marketeer, black mark in my family, but my grandfather was a very kind, good man, a wonderful person, and I don't know, I think it may have been trumped up, but my father took the rap because he was the son-in-law and he was a good man guy too, so he went to jail for a while. I don't know how long, but my mother used to visit him, and the man who was in charge, a soldier, or policeman I should say, who was in charge of jail, said to my mother, when you come to get your husband to bring him home, leave immediately. He's going to be taken away. He was a foreign Jew and he was a young man. And so she was very concerned. She needed him. She had two very young children and her aged parents, my grandfather, who limped. He had a wooden leg. somehow or other she arranged to leave the area, and we went to a place called Evo-les-Bains. Now, in Evo-les-Bains is a spa town. I'm sure many of you know what a spa town is. And my father, to earn a living, taught swimming. Imagine a yeshiva bocha teaching goyim swimming. I can't believe it. But he did, to try and earn some extra money. We lived, and there in that town, there were rumors started going around that young men were being picked up to be taken to work. And they didn't know any differently. I think that my mother really thought she needed my father. And every time there was a rumor that there may be a rafle in French, a roundup, they had access to a garden shed, somebody's garden shed, and they hid there overnight, leaving my brother and I alone with my grandparents. I must say to you, we did not wear the yellow star. First of all, Sammy and I were too young, but my mother and father, my grandparents did not, because we were in Free France. When France capitulated, France was divided into two. You're possibly aware of this. And the northern section to the German border and Belgian border, etc., the Jews all wore the yellow star, and children over the age of 6. So that meant the city of Paris, all those northern towns. But we were in the zone libre, and the free zone, unoccupied, and run by a different government. Maréchal Pétain was the leader of the French, so-called Free French in that zone. And my parents didn't wear, neither did my grandparents. We stayed in that spa town for a number of months. I don't think it was too long. But there were so many refugees coming in that we had to leave, and we went then to I'm sorry, but we moved to a place called Felletin. Felletin was in more central regions, in the mountainous regions of France, near Aubusson and Limoges. Now, if I talk to you, I think you probably know the Limoges China, and Aubusson, those famous carpet people, where they had, the nobility had carpets from Aubusson. They're worth a fortune today. And that was a region that we went to. We were accepted in the town of Felletin, my parents together, when my grandparents presented. Still Goldman Pshenica, they had their papers, and we were accepted to live among this community in this town. And we took up rooms, and we lived. And my brother and I were sent to school. For stability, my parents always, as young as we were, always sent us to school. By that time, I was just over 5. And in that place, it seems, my mother decided, and maybe my father, to send us away to Switzerland. My mother had an aunt in Switzerland, in Zurich, who, if we could get across the border safely, Sammy and I could be taken across, then she would look after us. Because the war had been on, or we're talking 1943 now. This is quite a while. And my mother and father, I think, must have felt, they've never talked about it much, but they felt that this, certainly my mother, this would be a good option. And I don't remember it. In the middle of the night, they took us to Aubusson and put us on a train through the window. I think I remember. I don't remember. In the middle of the night, to a young man of 21, who my mother knew from Strasbourg when she was living there, and a young woman. I think they worked for OSE, Œuvre de Secours des Enfants, which was a Jewish organization which was very active in France, trying to save Jewish children. We were taken away. We were taken to a border town. I don't know exactly which one. And with the instructions that to give us only just an individual or a couple who had 2 children on their passport of a similar age to Sam and I. No one was found. And and my parents got a message 2 days later, the parcels haven't been delivered. But in the meantime, my grandfather took to his bed and he blamed my mother and accused her of terrible things, of sending his only grandchildren away. But we returned for a while, and life was quite good. My father had injured himself in that town. He'd walked out, I don't often talk about it, but he had walked into, they had wine barrels, they were making casks, wine casks, and he walked into one of them one late evening and he injured himself. So he was limping, my grandfather was limping, my father was limping, but in the town of Velta, my parents, when they took up life there, they had made friends with different people. There were, in all, with us included, our two families, there were 13 Jewish families. And my parents were in contact with all these families, but very importantly, they made friends with different people in the town, in particular the chief of police. And they said to the chief of police, my father said to him one day, if anything ever happens in this town, do you think you would let me know? And the policeman said yes. On the 4th of November 1943, which was a Thursday in France, Sam and I were not attending school, no one, because there was no school. The policeman received in his office 2 men who were the milice. I want you to know that in France, it was not necessarily the Germans, the Nazis, the Gestapo who picked up Jews, certainly not in the areas that we were in. There were plenty of French collaborators who were very willing workers, and there are books about the willing workers in Germany and other places, who were anti-Semitic and would be very happy to hand over Jews. These 2 men must have been part of it. They put a sheet of paper down on the policeman's office desk, and on it he read 13 family names, all the Jewish families, because we had registered in that town, so they knew who was where, registered in that town of Velta, and they had come to pick us up. The policeman excused himself, went apparently to the back of his office where his family lived, told his wife and daughter, go and warn the Jews, they have to leave immediately, they're in danger. The mother came to us, my father took my brother Sammy by the hand, and I was 4 weeks later, I was going to be 6 years old. My mother took me, and each went to warn a family, and my father then picked up my grandparents, and it was a country town. So we had dirt roads, unpaved roads, and it was rural, we had fields nearby, and I remember there was a woman who raised goats there, and we met my father, my mother and I on the way through into a forest. And why a forest? My parents had been looking for, while we had food, often they didn't have enough food. So my mother used to, and father, used to go into various farms. They had a bicycle, because our car was hidden in 1930, would have been hidden by 1940, and remained in Périgueux. And my parents exchanged their car for bikes, which my mother called a Rolls Royce. I think it's important that. And they could range out into different farms, and so they met different people. And one of the things that my parents did, people are always open to a nice gift, and the chief of police always every now and then used to get a side of pork. So worked in Australia, and we used the expression, she's sweet. My father sweetened him up. So that was maybe one of the reasons that he had such good relationships with people, apart from being a very charming man. But we were warned, we went into the forest, and there my parents knew that there was a farmer and his wife. They were actually Poles, and they were tenant farmers, and my parents explained what had happened, and the farmer agreed that we could use his barn for the night. In the end, it ended up not just us, but we were 12 families there in that barn. And we remained there for 4 nights. There was nothing in that, We walked out. I'm dressed very well compared to what the people were. We just didn't, whatever, we couldn't take anything. No food, nothing. We just walked out. That was it. All of us. That one family didn't come, and I think it's important I tell you about that one family. Maybe someone is here in this room related to that one family. I don't know. But there was one family, and I only found out through my grandson who's here in Jerusalem. He found out 5 years ago that someone suggested, why is there no record of all this? And he did find a record. The book was written by Monsieur Dupré, who was the stepson of the man to whose family it was that was missing. It turns out that when the policemen came to their home, to this family's home, they were called Deutsch. They were Hungarian Jews. And the wife was heavily pregnant. She saw the policeman coming with two strangers, and she persuaded her husband to leave the premises unseen. She remained with her 3 children, her father-in-law and her mother-in-law. She was sure she was going to be safe. The children important to me that I give you their names because they existed. Till now they were anonymous. Until then I never knew their name. Their name is now Deutsch. There was Georges, who was 15, Marie, who was 11, and Pierre, who was 8. They were taken away together with their mother and grandfather. And why the grandmother wasn't taken away was because one of the kids, or all of the kids, had the presence of mind to turn around to their grandmother and say, "Au revoir, madame." And the two men who picked them up thought she was the housekeeper or the cleaner, left her alone. We didn't know. We were safely in the forest and we remained there. And on the 5th day, the farmer said we couldn't remain there. It was too unsafe for him. And my parents returned to the town. Not before my father and mother volunteered, apparently. They disguised my father as a woman. They returned to go back to the city of Feltin, the township of Feltin, to see if it was safe for us to get back, if anyone was dangerous. And it turned out it wasn't. We could come back. And then my parents decided it was too dangerous there for them because there's 13 registered Jewish families. They'll come back again. So my mum and dad immediately tried to do something about it. First they went to see the local priest. And I remember going with my parents there. I always had in my mind this enormous building, which I always talked about a monastery. It turned out it was the local church. And the priest really wanted to help our family because he liked my dad. My dad had been in Yeshiva Bocha till the age of 20. He knew the Bible very, very well. And he could discuss things with this poor small town priest who he was very interested in having him around. And as a consequence, it meant my mother and Sammy and I would be within his orbit. But one of the things that we would have to do was that Sammy and I would have to go to church daily and become Catholics. And my father said, no, thank you. He wasn't willing to do that. And he said he'd try and find another way. So they managed to get fake identity papers. I'm sure they bribed someone. We got false identity. From Goldman, I became May, Sammy and Mimi May, and my grandparents became Arnold. And then my parents sent us away. Sammy and I, we went alone to a farming family in a place called Madartige. Not important. I'm practicing and showing off my good French accent. And it is. C'est pas mal?
Excellent.
Merci. and in Madartige, there we joined a farming family, and remained there for about 5-6 months because I remember a winter and tobogganing, and Sammy and I had to work like farm children. By that time I was 6, and Sammy was not quite 5. And we worked hard. We had to make butter and help him. And one day, I think about 5-6 months into our stay there, Sammy was in the house with the grandfather, and there was a banging on the door. I was out on the farm premises, and the grandfather got a shock, and he took my brother Sammy and he threw him into the cellar, pushed him into the cellar, and closed the door. And when Sammy was safe, he opened the front door, and a man stood there and said he was from the authorities. Neighboring farmers had gone to the authorities to say they suspected Jewish children were being protected or housed by this farming family, and he had come to check up. He looked through the house. It was a 2-story house, I remember, and he didn't find Sammy. Now Sammy was cowering in the cellar. My brother today is a strong, big, tall, wonderful, wonderful man, and for him it was a terrible event. He was alone, and he was scared, and I wasn't there. I was always his companion, and something that he's never been able to deal with easily to this day. He's only spoken with me once somewhere, and he did a brilliant job, but he doesn't want to do it. He just can't. But he wasn't found, and that evening when the family returned from their chores on the land or whatever, it was decided that Sammy and I had to be sent away. We were putting them in danger, because it's just every time if they don't find someone, they'll come back, you know, and they would have found me. And like the Deutsch, had they found me and Sammy, we would have been sent away to a holding camp like the Deutsch children. The Deutsch children were picked up on the 4th of November 1943. By the 7th of December, they were on a convoy to Auschwitz. I've got a book that was written by Serge and Beate Klasfeld about the deportation of 76,000 Jews from France to concentration camps, mainly Auschwitz. And the names are, it's tragic to see. They've even got Greek Jews in that book, but from Salonika. But it's absolutely tragic. And these I found, once I knew the name of the Deutsch children, I tracked them down to the 7th of December 1943. And none of them survives. Not the mother, not the children, no one. We weren't found, but had we been found, we would have been in that. And my parents wouldn't have known where to find us. Which camp? There were plenty of camps in France. It wasn't just Drancy and Pithiviers. There were many more, and certainly in central France where we were. They had willing collaborators, but we weren't found. And of course, as you know, I'm standing here in front of you and talking to you. So we weren't found. We were returned to my parents. But my parents were no longer in Felda. My parents were now somewhere else. When we were in that spa town where my father taught swimming, my grandmother hadn't been well. So she had been, a court doctor had come, and he sympathized with the family, and he gave my mother and father a note just before he left, and on the note was a name of a man. He said, if you ever need help, maybe this man can help you. And when we were safely in Madartiche with the farmers alone, my parents remembered the letter, and probably my father, because he had a great memory, and his daughter doesn't inherit his memory, unfortunately, but they did remember. They made it their business to find this man, which was not too far from Fedtown, where they'd come to try and pick us up. That's the whole family on the 4th of November. But my parents, I shouldn't use my hands so much, my parents found the man, and he was a landholder. He had a huge farm with a lake, and a flour mill. He had 3 families working for him who had homes on his land, And my parents found him, gave him the note, he read the note, and they said, we're Jews and we need help. He said, I don't like Jews and I hate the Bosch. The Bosch are the Germans, a derogatory term for Germans. And with that, my parents were able to live with him, form part of that community. My father became, but one of the, they received a home which was totally bare of anything. I mean, this is a palace compared to what that was. And my father had to work as a peasant farmer, and he worked hard. And he always told us how hard, especially my brother Sammy, how hard he had to work. But he was a strong young man, and he was very willing. And for that, he got a midday meal for his work, and my mother and father, and together with my grandparents, had sanctuary there. And we show up, Sammy and I, and they had always said they didn't have children. Now they had to say, no, we're a niece and nephew, we lived in Lyon with my mother's sister, she didn't have anyone, I mean she was an only child. Everyone nodded, believed her, and so they said, and we joined the community. And of course it was wonderful. You know, and being farm children, there's nothing wrong with being farm children. And you have animals to play with, other kids, which is not something we were familiar with. And we lived there quite peacefully until one morning we were Sammy and I were playing on the road, and which was a very narrow road, enough for one car and one truck. And early one morning with a couple of the village kids, it's not village, it was a farming community, and my brother and I, because I talked to schools, I talked differently, but my mother started making a lot of big fuss, and you have children, many of you, and your grandchildren, and you know when they're 5, 6 years old, then once they get it, they nooch and they don't stop nooching. And Sammy nooched, and we finally took the other 2 children, myself, stopped our play, and we took notice of what he was complaining about, and we realized there was something sounds and that we were different in that you hear birds, you hear wind in the trees, you don't hear these sounds, a rumbling, something, vibrations in the ground. And we ran to our parents who were aware that something was going on, and they were outside the house that were really, and they told us to, like obedient good French children, you obeyed in those days everything you were told, and we were told get down, and we got down and be quiet. And trucks started, German army, a convoy of German army trucks started going through that village, or that community I should say. And my parents realized what it was, and they were terrified. And the convoy stopped in the village, and in the community, a soldier jumped out, banging on the door. And my parents had always told Sammy and me, in Australia we talk about stranger danger. Don't talk to the bad men. They were the bad men. And don't talk, and if someone asks you a question, you never answer, you just say, your name is Mimi, and you don't remember and you don't know. And that was it. And for me, for the first time in my life, I was afraid. I was never afraid of anything. I was afraid. I was terrified. These men in front of me were the bad men, in full uniform. And what seemed like forever, they banged, and no one responded, and they left. Monsieur Belgi was so concerned that he said that my parents would sleep in the chicken coop, which I think that was Sammy and I, that's a chicken coop, circa 1986, at the back up here. And they would sleep in the chicken coop overnight, and my grandparents and Sammy and I would sleep in his home, which is a 14th century home, stone. I think Ilana has a photo somewhere you'll show. Look at this impressive house. So we lived up on the first floor, not one night but 2 nights, because if another convoy came through, it's quite possible that they would not just stop and go. They would stop and search. We had 3 males, all circumcised. They would have found us. It was dangerous for the entire community. And Monsieur Berger was not just a simple farmer, and he understood. So we remained with him in his home. And during the day, life apparently went on normally, but in the evening we stayed in his home. And after that, we had a few other incidents, not as dangerous. And then the war finished for us. We turned bit by bit, and we ended up in Périgueux, where my father, I remember, insisted that we have our first Hebrew lessons. And as I had said before, I wasn't too excited about learning Hebrew. And I started school. And we found that our family in Périgueux, most of them had survived, except one uncle who had been picked up during the war. He was picked up as an officer, German officer had been killed. So as a reprisal, a number of men, about 10 or 12 men were picked up, among them Jews. They released the Christians and they shot the Jews. There's a memorial outside of Périgueux towards going to La Gave, where there's a memorial to the Jews that were murdered there. That was one of my uncles. A cousin of my mother's died. He was in Drancy in Paris, and he ended up, I don't know, but I do know. Most of my family in France survived. My extended, the ones who had been in Strasbourg with us. Bit by bit we returned to Strasbourg, and in Strasbourg we found my parents had rented apartments, and my grandparents prior to the war, and had stored all their things in the cellars and things. They couldn't get any of their possessions back. Everything had been stolen. They couldn't get into their apartments. And Sam and I were sent to school immediately, and because school was always important for stability. And there the kids spoke Alsacisch Deutsch. And although I spoke Yiddish, which was my first language, I was struggling with Alsacisch, and I had the last day of school for me was the 3rd of November 1943, and we're talking 1945. Sammy and I were then put in a special school, and of course Hebrew lessons started immediately. The chief rabbi, and I remember my cousin's bar mitzvah, which was something of great pride for me. And I'd never seen that, and I loved my cousins who survived. They were a little older than me. One day in Strasbourg, my parents, well, before I get to that, my father used to take me to the transports that came from the east and the Poland, particularly Poland, because he had found out that his 4 sisters and 1 brother had died in concentration camp with their families. They were all married with children. So his mother died of starvation. She was an Orthodox Jewish. She refused to eat treif, so she died of starvation in the ghetto in Rzeszów in Galicia. And the rest of the family perished. And my mother also found out her entire family, my grandparents, the entire family on her side in Warsaw also perished. We have nobody in Poland that I'm related to, except again my grandson Mikey found out, no, it wasn't Mikey, it found out, it was my grandson in Sydney, found out that there was a cousin who had married a non-Jew. Her daughter, who was born in 1937 like me, always thought she was a Christian, although her father was a Christian. Her mother survived, and she found in the 1960s that she was a Jewess on the mother's side, but she wasn't interested. She suddenly, by chance, something went out where he was trying to find out information. She wrote back, she's related to, she's a Maiman on her mother's side, and she's from Warsaw. She's the only one, but she was a professor an academic and more interested in that. So I don't count her in, but that's the only member of the family that I know on both my mother and father's side would survive. I'll continue with me, because we went to, my parents were in a store one day and someone said the Juden sind wieder da, the Jews are back, they haven't all been built. What a pity. So that was when my parents decided, that's it. We can't, our children can't grow up in Europe anymore. We've got to do something to get out. Ideally, my father would have wanted, and my mother would have wanted to go to America, the Golden Medina, but my father's identical twin brother was living in Bayonne, New Jersey, and he found out that his brother in Italy had survived as well. So he wanted to go, they wanted to get to America, and but it was decided that we were Poles, and there was a Polish quota. We were back to being Polish again, and we weren't stateless anymore, and we couldn't get into America because there was as I said, a quota, and we had to wait. My parents decided whoever comes first, Australia. My mother had an uncle, my grandfather's younger brother, her father's younger brother, had come to Australia in 1936, gone to Australia, not come, gone to Australia in 1936 with a son, and we won the lottery. We really did. Anyone who came to Australia after the Second World War, I think, won the lottery. We ended up going to Australia, a very difficult voyage. We left my grandparents in France. They didn't want to come. So we came to Australia. We lived outside a Jewish community, a place called Auburn, which is today full of Muslims, but Auburn in those days was very, very Australian. We arrived the 15th of January 1947, and we had a few adventures on the way. We had a terrible ship, mostly Holocaust survivors. We actually took a voyage we went from Marseille, Suez Canal, Djibouti, which is Ethiopia today, and we're allowed to get off. I love to tell this story, especially here in this audience. My dad, all the passengers got off the ship that wanted to, and we went to Djibouti, and I remember the markets, but my father disappeared. And it was time to get back to the boat, and my father to the ship. And my father had not reappeared, and my mother was very anxious, and if she was anxious, we were anxious, because you are. We didn't understand, but Papa wasn't there, so we were very upset. He came running as the ship was about to lift not the anchor, but he was going to, and so he jumped on board. And I know people here sitting here who knew my dad, and my dad, he had found a Jewish community. He was sitting in shul with Ethiopian Jews, the falashes. He's sitting on the floor there. He communicated in Italian, I would imagine, in Ivrit. So that's what he did. My father was always finding shuls, but this was probably the most exotic one that he'd ever attended. And he came, and we ended up in Saigon, where they were fighting. It was a French, Saigon in those days belonged to France. It was a French colony. It was called Indochine, and we lived in we were dumped. The ship was carrying arms and armaments for the war effort, because it belonged, the French were fighting the Viet Minh, and then the clever Americans then started fighting the Viet Cong. But we were with the first, in the middle of a war, and we were in the middle of an army camp, and there I started to get sick. We were there a number of weeks, and my parents, to show you the strength of my parents and their determination, were the most extraordinary young people. Because by 1935, my father, 47, my father was 37, and my mother was 33 years younger, so she was 4 years younger, 33. I started to get unwell. We were in an encampment of soldiers, French soldiers. There was a war on. There were bombs exploding. You could hear it. There were curfews, and my parents felt they had to get out. So they ran around all over Saigon, apparently, And that through the Dutch consul they were able to get a plane. If 40 people would, 40 passengers for 40 people. And they managed to raise 40 people within that group of people who contacted family members elsewhere and were able to raise money to go on this plane. And we let say go by plane. And my most enduring memory of this whole event is trucks coming to get us, army trucks, and the passengers that were left behind running behind us singing Avenu Shalom Aleichem, which for me, every time I hear it, I cry, because it brings back the memory of those days. And we returned, and it took about 3 days to get to Sydney. We had stops along the way. When we reached Australia, we came through Darwin, and we had the most magnificent welcome in the middle of the night. You know, we had inoculations for COVID. We had inoculations in those days in the middle of the night because we didn't have the correct inoculations. And then they presented us with a feast of wonderful fruits and food, which was amazing, and that was Australia. And then we came to Sydney and we went to the backwoods where there weren't any Jews really. And Sammy and I, about 10 days on about the 27th of January, we arrived the 15th, we started school, and there we started to learn to speak English. We were separated from my parents. My uncle had a shop and he lived behind the shop, and Sammy and I stayed with him. We stayed on sofas or whatever. We didn't have proper room for us. And my parents rented a room from a young couple, and like that we lived for a number of months. My father, who was a determined man, found a business, and he bought a cafe restaurant. No English, I mean, come on. But he did all the things that all the refugees did who came to Australia. But we had a good welcome, you know, and bit by bit eventually we came to the eastern suburbs, to Jewish community there. My father became involved with the Jewish community because it was natural for him. And I'm proud of what my parents achieved. We achieved a good name. I live off the fact that my parents achieved a really good name. They were most amazing people. Because I have an audience like yourselves here, my pride in my parents, but especially my father. My father was president of a Hebrew Kedisha in Australia for many years. He got the award of Haver, which to me was very important, the second layman in Australia in its history to ever be awarded that. He also got an OBE. For the Americans, I know that you don't know what it is. It's the Order of the British Empire for his work within the Jewish community. So I'm really proud they belong to B'nai Brit. They were very communal-minded, and they were wonderful, wonderful people. They're now deceased, of course, but they made their mark, and certainly with their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they are a source of great pride. I want to tell you about my husband. My husband was born in France. I hope I have time because I waddled on a little bit too much, waffle on. My husband was born in France in 1933 in Paris. Both his parents were from Poland. His older sister Rivka was born in Poland. They were called Weitzelbaum. The mother's name was Sibylska. The family came to Paris when my late sister-in-law was just about 9 months, 6 months. I really don't know, but they arrived about 28 and settled in Paris. And poor people. That's why they came to France, because they were poor and they were trying to better their lives. They had 2 more children. They had son Henri and my husband Leon in 1933, and Henri was 18 months older. When the Germans, it was evident that there was going to be a war. In Paris, like in Strasbourg, they said families with children should send them out of the area. My husband's mother, who was an Orthodox Jewess, the family was Orthodox, went to see Zalman Schneerson, who had just arrived, been in Paris since about 1938. She said to him, she knew him apparently, she was part of his congregation. We are an Orthodox Jewish family. Children are being sent out of Paris. I believe I should send my children out, but I can't send them to a normal school. They're Orthodox. We're Orthodox and we keep kashrut. They have to be in a kosher home. He said, don't worry, I'm doing something. On the 20th of June, my head's not working, February 1940, they were on a railway station, and 3 children together with their mother, and she sent them off to the school that Salman Schneerson had set up. 120 boys and girls. My husband was among the younger ones, and they ended up going to a home outside of Paris. I believe one of the homes was a Rothschild, so it wouldn't have been a little home, it would have been something quite impressive. And I know my husband used to say that he had to polish the floors, do things. He missed his parents terribly. His mother was a seamstress, it seems, you know, she made clothing, so that he had extra clothing for her. And it's very poignant what I think it's very poignant. He had, when he came, apparently the people who looked after them, the teachers who were going to the young people, went through the children's possessions, and the woman who came to see what my husband had said, you have too many pants and things, I'm giving them away, and she took them away, and he started to cry. He's 7 years old, and she said, look, other children don't have, and you have so much. And he said, I cried. And he said, but then I learned other children I have to share. So he learned a lesson there that he has to share. They managed to survive the war in France until 1943. Before Rosh Hashanah 1943, they were moved a couple of times, not too far from where we were actually, about 90 kilometers as the crow flies. So I didn't realize that until much later. The group of children were warned. Someone came and said they have to leave immediately. And they left immediately, and they're broken up into groups. My husband tells me that he was with a larger group at first, and they were in Lyon station, and they were up in the roof attic, in the roof cavity, and they heard a lot of noise, people and noise of foot people walking, and it was late at night. They looked down through the windows, that they have these semicircular windows, and he looked down and he saw Jews, he said, Jews of Lyon being marched into the station, and they were hiding up in the station. Anyway, they caught trains, and what was happening is they were going to do that, those 120 boys and girls, they were going to try and get them across into Switzerland. And I think that was Œuvre de Secours des Enfants that facilitated this. And my husband tells me that his sister, with her, there were 8 other children, so 9 children. She was 15 and a half. She was responsible for taking 8 children across into Switzerland. I mean, it's unbelievable. Could our kids do it? We wouldn't want them to do it today. But she tried twice and failed. The 3rd time she managed to get them across into no man's land, and they were stopped by a guard, a Swiss guard. They were confused. He had buttons, he had what looked like a German uniform, the helmet and everything, but the buttons had not the Hexenpost, but they had the Swiss,
yeah.
So that was, but my husband didn't see that, and Raymond said to them, run, so that My husband and his brother ran, and they realized no one was following them. And when he turned around, they saw that they were all down, so quickly went back. And the policeman said that the guard, not the policeman, the guard at the border, had told them to lie down because there was this German patrol going through. And with that, he saved their lives, and they were able to come into Switzerland. And they stayed at a school. They were in a camp, and they were put up in a camp situation. I know that my husband had said that young men, young French Jews, young men 18, 19, when they came across and they stayed in the camp where they were, the Swiss came at night, the authorities, and took them back to the border and threw them out. I didn't believe it, really, you know. But it actually happened because a husband and wife called Dimnis, Henry and Miryam Dimnis, who were like their mentors, who looked after them and helped them in France, and they managed to get into Switzerland with the group. I met them in Los Angeles, and I asked them, and that actually did happen. And when they came in, that group of children, like my sister-in-law, who was to become my sister-in-law, she said to her brothers, and she was that one tough kid, she said, "You're not to say, like my parents, no, you don't, just your name, and you don't know." And they were registered as the Cybulska kids. Their mother's name was Cybulska. They'd been married in a Chuppah Kedushin in Poland, but I don't think they were married in France, registered in the registry office. So they were registered as Cybulska. They remained in Switzerland, and eventually the war ended. My sister-in-law, Raymond, who was to become my sister-in-law, remained in Switzerland, and she actually married a young man, an Orthodox Jew, and remained. And Léon, his brother Henri, was sent back to Paris to an orphanage where they remained. Why did they come to Australia? They were supposed to go to Canada, but it was a lottery, you know. And my sister-in-law was very reluctant to see her brothers go, because her mother had said to her at that railway station on the 20th of February 1940, you have a right hand and a left hand. You have to hang on to your brothers and look after them. That's your work, that's your job. And she did that. She did that all her life. My husband came to Australia together with his wife, his brother, in 1948, about 18 months after we arrived. And I eventually met him. I always heard about Léon, why is this, Léon, why is that? I never knew him, you know. And eventually I met him, and he's a nice guy, and that's it. And it wasn't a shidduch, it was actually a love affair, but it took quite a long time to happen. I married him, he was a wonderful man, fabulous guy, and good, kind, honest, made a very nice name for himself. And we had 3 children, and I have 11 grandchildren. I have a son in Los Angeles. I have a daughter here, as you met, in LA, in Israel, and I have a daughter in Australia, grandchildren. If you have any questions, my family has thrived in Australia. I'm very proud of the fact that my family here we have a presence in Israel, which is what my father would have wanted, because he really wanted to come to live in Palestine and Israel. For him, it was a great source of pride and joy. And I see how everyone is grown up, because they're mostly all adults in my family now. I'm so very proud. But I'm very grateful to you for being here in such numbers. And more than anything, I'm overwhelmed to be here in Israel, speaking to you. It means so much to me, really does. And I'm speaking to a Jewish audience is so different to speaking to non-Jews. I can let my hair out and tell you the absolute truth, although I don't make a secret of the fact that I'm Jewish. I'm asked in schools and things. Not so long ago I was asked by someone, how do you feel about being a Jew after all that? And I said, great, absolutely, I'm so proud of my people. You know, I've also told them if Jesus came back on earth, he'd be shocked he'd be a Jew today. You know, he was never a Christian anyway. He was always a Jew. You know, he would be Torah. He would, wouldn't he? That's it. And they would have persecuted him in the same way as we were persecuted. But we're hoping for a better future, and certainly for Israel. I wish you, for me, I understand that should anything happen in Israel, our hearts and we're there. We suffer in the diaspora in the same way, and for you. So I feel I can speak about that here. In Australia, I don't. So I feel, you know, it's great. Thank you very much.
Do you want to ask questions? Yeah.
Has anybody got any questions for Mimi? If anybody's got any questions public, you can ask them.
Well done. What was your name? Sonia Batsky? Yes. It's Mimi Weiss. Mimi Goldman. Miryam Goldman. I went to school with you. Sonia. I went to your home. I knew your brother David and Liv. Yes. Don't you recognize me? Do you remember Pearl and Lucille? Yes. I was your friend. You persecuted me, but I was your friend. You did. You're the last one that I'm telling you, because I told Pearl died. Lucille's still alive. Pearl died here in Israel.
Just before the crowd leaves, I just want to say a public thank you to Mimi and to present a gift from Wits from Liz.
All right.
I'll never forgive you. That's my daughter. Oh. Now, there you go.
Okay.
Before the crowd leaves, I'd like to ask Les to please present a gift, a token of thanks to Mimi.
Mimi, this is just a very small token of our appreciation from the Wits Alumni. So you'll remember just a little picture.
Oh, wow.
I know you're going to have a lot of luggage, but this is very light.
I don't have that much. I didn't have much time to shop in this.
We've still got a few more.
Was hardly anything.
And then this is the poster of it, celebrating 100 years. So we are so grateful to you. Was Mimi not just absolutely inspiring? Your words are just unbelievable, and you are an inspiration to all of us. Really, we are so grateful to you. And now I'll ask Roy to give a...
And Mimi, in the name of Telfed, here's a token of thanks and a gift for Mimi.
Wow.
Memory of Yerushalayim. So I know that's strong in your heart. Absolutely. And I'd like to quote Elie Wiesel. A quote from Elie Wiesel. I marveled at the resistance of the Jewish people. Their characteristic is the desire to remember, and we saw that in your talk. The dates, the names, the places, unbelievable. No other people has an obsession with memory. That's from Elie Wiesel. So Mimi, it's been a pleasure, it's been an honor. Thank you very much. You did us well, and please continue mingling, eat what's still available, and join other Telfed events that we will have in the future. It's great having you. I really appreciate you all making it happen. And of course, Chodesh Tov.
Yes, Chodesh Tov. Yeah.
Chodesh Tov.
So, Rivka, let me introduce you to Eva. This is
It's important.
Wow.
It's important.
Wow.
It really does. Well, I'm going.
You're amazing. You spoke so nicely.
Monday, beautiful. I get up and I have 3 sessions a day. That's
so tiring. That's so tiring.
No, I do it because I do it. That's my job.
You're amazing.
It's so well paid that I love it.
Well, come on. Be well.
I was so interested when you said that someone going to because that's where they come from. Still isn't they come from?
That's right. I went to visit them that's when I first met them in 1958.
You're kidding.
Yeah. They're my first cousins. So the first trip I went overseas, I went to Bayonne to see them, meet them. Well, Judy was already married, so we went to Massachusetts where she lived.
That's where she lives, right?
And that's when I met Jack Reiner, my cousin, her husband.
Amazing. Well,
That's our world. That's our world.
I really am thrilled that Phyllis told me about you.
Oh,
and
good.
gave
And I
me
hope to
your
meet
daughter's-
you again.
And gave me your daughter's phone number.
Okay, well maybe next Pesach if you're here and I can come here, maybe I'll see you. Speak to everybody. We'll sit and I put my tablets on the plane, I read a book and I do it.
Mimi, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
You
you.
were amazing.
Thank you.
You were incredible, Mimi. You really were.
Thank you very much for your help.
It was wonderful. Wonderful.